What's up, guys? So, the question, and we're sitting at an odd angle today, by the way, because I have a Mitzi in my lap that is not going anywhere. But the question has been bouncing around in liberal Christian circles about whether or not Charlie Kirk has gone to heaven or hell. And the fact that this was a question was brought to my attention because there's a pastor I like whose videos I like, Ed Trevor's. And so we'll get into all of that in a moment, but first, of course, if you're just joining us, patreon.com/JordanOwen42 if you want to help me grow the channel. Now, even though I sometimes talk about Christian theological topics, this is not a ministry. You are just donating to my personal YouTube channel. And also, please be sure to check out my new solo album, Flipside Traveler, which is now available on all streaming services and that kind of thing. So, I, very much in the vein of classic progressive rock, Pink Floyd, Marillion, Peter Gabriel, that kind of thing, with touches of more modern sounds, vaporwave type things, and that kind of thing. So, it's been a labor of love for me for nearly a decade now, and I'm glad it's finally out. So, Flipside Traveler, check it out. So, bringing it back around, there's, like I said, I really like Ed Trevor's his videos, and he is a priest, I believe an Episcopal or Anglican priest of some variety, and I'll often say things like, when I'm talking about someone like Matt Walsh or something, I'll say that he's somebody I agree with maybe 10% of the time, just to put some perspective on it, whereas by contrast, Ed Trevor's is someone I probably agree with like 90% of the time. He does have a few beliefs like he agrees with Neil deGrasse Tyson that, Neil deGrasse Tyson has got this new thing going where he's saying that transgenderism is like the next stage of human evolution and all of that, and I am sorry, but wherever you stand on the transgender issue, Neil deGrasse Tyson knows full well that that's not how evolution works. Anyway, so it's there's occasional things where we would get rough around the edges, but by and large, he's someone I agree with on most things. And he was bringing up this question about that people have been asking. People, more liberal Christians, have been saying that Charlie Kirk would have to have gone to hell. And he makes the point first, and it's a point I'll reiterate, that it's not for any of us to decide who does and does not go to hell. That is go to hell or go to heaven. We are not the judge of anybody. We are not anybody's judge in that regard. It is not for us to make that call, and that's absolutely right. And he goes, he additionally makes the point that when you get to heaven, you're probably going to meet a lot of people that you can't imagine how they got there, and that kind of thing. So, I agree with all of that, and that's and I agree with that sentiment. If you really want a good look at the absurdity of human beings trying to predict who does and does not belong in heaven and hell, go read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. Absolutely phenomenal piece of writing. But more to the point, what I wanted to say, Mitzi says hi. What I wanted to say about Charlie Kirk and that kind of and this question about whether or not he's in heaven or hell. One, it's worth pointing out that in Christian theology, if you are looking at the deeds, a person's deeds themselves as the barometer of where their soul would end up in the afterlife, you are not interpreting it correctly. You're not understanding it. You're not understanding why Jesus Christ died on the cross, and what is implied in that and what is carried in it. That this is about. It is more a question of what is in the human heart, and has a person as a person in their heart moved to do God's will, and moved to have that connectivity, that relationship with God in their lives. And in that regard, Jesus is the solicitor, the intercessor on our behalf, who kind of serves as the bridge between our fundamentally imperfect morality and the perfect morality of God. And it's interesting because what happens is there's a lot of concepts that get brought, get brought into standard discussions of morality at the secular level that aren't even that are brought in, at least metaphorically, for even by secular people. And for example, Bill Maher, who is someone I used to agree with on a lot of things until he had that weird experience that only happens to people who see Donald Trump in three-dimensional corporeal form for some reason. But he made a point that we talk about karma, the idea of karma, and that it is this, in its proper context, it's this beautiful process of growth and renewal and that sort of thing. Whereas in modern society, when we talk about karma, we basically mean you took my parking place, now die. Pardon me. And with Charlie Kirk, who, again, he's not somebody I would say I have very much in common with on the whole. I've listened, he was not somebody I'd listened to very much of while he was alive. I knew who he was and what side he was on and who he was fighting for, obviously, but I've listened to a little more since he's passed. And I listened to one video where, for example, he talked about how that he said that to be rich in this country, all you have to do is live below your means and put $100 a week into a managed investment portfolio, and that you can be rich in this country. And he said that he talks to people who will blow $700 a week partying, and that they need to invest how to invest that money properly. And see, here's the thing: within the narrow box of who he's talking to, he's right that if you have $700, if you can afford to blow $700 a week on partying, you can take that money and put it and start investing it and start improving. Invest it in the stock market, start investing it in your future, and start doing proactive things with your life. That's absolutely true. The problem is there's people who don't have $700 a month to blow on groceries. And that's where it gets to be a problem. And that's the problem with all conservative advice. If you are, conservative advice works if you were born middle to upper middle class and already have, Mitzi is biting me for some reason. If you were born middle to upper middle class and just don't know what to do with your life, then yeah, those principles will start to work. The problem is there are people who could work their asses off for generations. Their whole families work their asses off generation after generation, and they'll never get to the level that Charlie Kirk is speaking to, and the level he as a conservative was assuming everybody was at. And that's that's the problem with it. The problem with the conservative mindset, and why you can't get anything across to them, meaningfully across to them. It's kind of like, Matt Walsh had a whole thing railing against the universal basic income. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there's all kinds of reasonable arguments you could make about why the universal basic income would be a bad idea. I'm not discounting those, but his argument was that the UBI that he was responding to, the proposed UBI, was $17,000 a year. And he was ranting about how, well, if you have any job, if you go out and work, just about any job will pay you at least $17,000 a year. In fact, you should be making at least 20,000 a year if you're working, or this many thousand a year. Uh, and what he's not understanding, he's assuming that anyone who received a UBI would just stop working altogether, and or that they wouldn't work altogether. And what he doesn't realize, it would be very, very hard to live on 17,000 a year, if at all. And I make way more than that, and it's still not enough. And that's what he doesn't understand. At my income level, if I had an additional 17,000 a year, I could just do the work I'm already doing, productive, contributing work to society, do the work I'm already doing, be saving for retirement, be, taking good care of myself. Now, there are, like I said, there are arguments against UBI, like the fact that, let's be honest, most people, if you give them universal basic income, they'll do dumb things like put it all in crypto and stuff like that, and ridiculous, irresponsible things. So, like I said, the idea is not unassailable, but at a fundamental level, he doesn't understand that the issue is not people wanting 17,000 a year so they can stop working. It's so that they want 17,000 a year extra or on top of that so that they can keep working and afford to be alive. And you just cannot get things across to conservatives like that. And while I have never at all been a social conservative, I had my roughly decade-long foray into the Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman, F.A. Hayek realm of various libertarian economic policies and all of that sort of thing. And I think there's something very intoxicating about feeling like you've kind of seen the Matrix, and you can you can see what nobody else is seeing because you found this cool side perspective on all of that. But at the at the end of the day, the only time those ideas are ever discussed in the public sphere is when conservatives need to make their appeal to the economic intelligentsia of the world, and then they switch. Once they've secured that vote, they switch right back to being the same insufferable assholes they've always been. Anyway, so my point with all of that is that it seems like it's been a long day. Anyway, it seems like Charlie Kirk's most of Charlie Kirk's worst misdeeds against humanity boil down to him being a standard issue, out of touch Republican. The people who have convinced themselves that if they focus all of their energy on making rich people richer, then everything else falls into place. And there are things he said that sting, things that are heinous, things like his little observation about guns or school shootings being the price we pay for the Second Amendment, the observation that he makes about the thing he said about how he wouldn't want to be if I'm quoting this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, he said he wouldn't want to be operated on by a black lesbian and all of that kind of thing. I don't agree with those remarks, and I will not view them as acceptable. But here's the thing. At the mortal level, those are all deeds, those misdeeds, those insensitive, callous things that he said are all things that could be addressed with an apology. Like, literally, just, if he wanted to have some change of heart about that, literally, he could it could just be at the level of, I'm sorry, that was a bad idea, I realize, or that was a bad idea, badly spoken, and I totally realize how heartless it was of me, and move forward from there. And so that's the thing. We now, what I'd rather bring up, rather than try to argue whether or not Charlie Kirk is in heaven or hell, which, like I said, is already something I would not want to try to do, but imagine, or instead, let's think about why it is that those remarks, why people would see those remarks as grounds for eternal damnation. And there's a lot of different perspectives on what eternal damnation looks like. Some people ascribe to the medieval Inquisition concept of hell with eternal fire and poking you with pitchforks and all of that stuff. Things that bear striking resemblance to the tortures of the Inquisition and that sort of thing. There's people who put it in that context. There's people who would put it more in the context of someone being so lost inside their own misery and inner torment that they cannot receive love, which is more where I would stand on it. But throughout all of that, whatever your perspective on hell, why do you see it as grounds for eternal judgment or eternal damnation, that he died having said some things that could have been in this life addressed with an apology? An apology is good enough for you, but it wouldn't be good enough for God. And that's what worries me, because what happens, the way the world works now, as soon as if you have any degree of notoriety at all, people start stacking up your misdeeds on and uploading every idiotic or misspoken thing you've ever said to the internet, and we all kind of start weighing you at weighing out what kind of person you are and that sort of thing. And so my question would be, why is it that your standard for eternal damnation is so low? Because here's the thing. The real question, I think, would come down to what Charlie Kirk has in his heart. And that's a more complex question. We can talk about how it's indicative, how what he said might be indicative of what's in his heart. But I think even then we do ourselves a disservice of not realizing that what may have been in his heart was just a tremendous amount of blindness, of misperception, confusion, that kind of thing. And I'm not saying this to necessarily, cast Charlie Kirk in a good light or make him sound like a good person or something like that. Like I said, I'm only, I didn't pay much attention to him when he was alive. I knew he'd said a few things I didn't agree with, and, like I just described, a few things I didn't agree with, some things I did, and like anybody else, the chips kind of fall where they may on that. But fundamentally, I knew that we were, our goals for, our vision for the country was fundamental, and where we wanted the country to go were fundamentally opposite. But as we look at that and as we think about that, to more liberal Christians out there, so many of my theological videos are in response to, so many of my theological videos are in response to conservative Christians or secular atheist people who are essentially, weirdly enough, their views are essentially the same as extremely conservative Christians, with the exception that they're hoping that the Bible is not true. They're hoping it's all false, because in their mind, if it was true, the only reasonable course of action would be extreme right-wing Christian conservatism, which I think says more about what they may be on the run from in their own hearts, ultimately, than the actual truth of Christianity, the truth of the Bible, that kind of thing. But now I find myself turning back to the more liberal Christians, the ones that are trying to make the argument that Charlie Kirk would be in hell simply for the unforgivable crime, apparently, of having reprehensible opinions. And what the question I would turn back to you, and it's a rhetorical question, I don't want an answer, I want you to think about it, is why is it so hard for you to forgive Charlie Kirk? I mean, you can say, sure, that he was one of the thought leaders that helped roll turn the country in this direction that it's in now, but ultimately, the worst thing you can say about this person is that he had bad ideas. And now that he has paid the ultimate price that any of us can pay in this life, which is to leave this life, it's very strange to me that that you would want to hold on to the prospect of his eternal damnation as some kind of soothing mechanism. The original Christians were envisioning hell and damnation as something that would come to the Roman government that was persecuting them at the time, and that was so mistreating people in ways that we stagger to or we shudder to imagine nowadays in the modern world. So it's just strange to me that we would need to hold out that same, and that by the way, someone was asking about more liberal interpretations of things like the Book of Revelation, and the more liberal interpretation of that is to understand that they were envisioning what was going to happen to their enemies at a time when they were being persecuted in very extreme ways, and it was a way of holding out hope that love would win in the end. And I feel like it says so much about us and how out of touch with the original message of the Bible we are as more liberal-minded Christians, that we would even be wondering whether or not Charlie Kirk went to heaven. Went to heaven or hell. Like, honestly, it shouldn't be our concern to worry about those things at all. That's not our business, and that's not our issue. And I think when we start wondering about that, we start to do, bringing The Great Divorce back into it by C.S. Lewis. When we start to think that way, we end up like one of the characters in The Great Divorce, who is this guy who's this business owner, and he gets to heaven, and he can't stay in heaven because the person that greets him was a murderer. And he can't understand. He's like, I lived my life perfectly, and he lived his life, in accordance with the law, followed the law as it was written and all of that, and ended up in hell, and now he's being allowed to visit heaven for the day. And the person that comes out to meet him was a murderer, and he can't deal with the fact that this murderer is going to come welcome him into heaven. And he says to the guy, he says, well, the guy you murdered, is he in heaven? He said, oh yes, he is. I saw him earlier. He said to tell you hello. And this guy, the person he's talking to, has this unencumbered spirit that's been forgiven by God, and this guy can't stay in heaven because he's so the new arrival can't stay in heaven because he's so overcome with contempt at the fact that he never killed anybody. Yeah, but your heart was full of slime, full of black tar. That's why, that's what happened to you, what damned you, not the specific acts themselves. And that's where we end up being. The question you should be asking yourself, in conclusion, is not whether or not Charlie Kirk is in heaven. The question you as a more liberal-minded Christian should be asking yourself is, when I get to heaven, if Charlie Kirk is the angel that comes to welcome me, am I going to be able to take his hand and walk through the gates? That's the question you should be asking yourself. And by the way, I watched I clicked onto the Charlie Kirk memorial service that was happening today. And I clicked on it right as Donnie Dipshit was doing his thing, and he gets on there and he talks about how much he hates his enemies, and that he hated his enemies, or he hates his enemies, and he knows that that's making Charlie Kirk angry up in heaven right now, but that Charlie didn't hate anybody. And God, I could do a whole other video on this topic, but God, that just sickens me. It's like, look, I understand what Donnie Dipshit is trying to do there. He's trying to confess moral shortcoming in his own character, as a contrast to what a quality person he's arguing that Charlie Kirk was. I get it. I understand the point of what he's trying to say. The problem is the way he said it, going on about, I know that if Barack Obama had to give that speech, he would have said that Charlie had no hate for his enemies and that that's an example we should all follow. He would not have gotten up there and jerked himself off about how much he hates his own personal enemies, because we know that's what's at the forefront of his mind in reality anyway. God. Ugh. But yeah, like I said, ending on my mic drop moment a second time. Don't ask yourself whether or not Charlie Kirk is in heaven or hell. Ask yourself whether or not you're going to be able to take his hand if he is the angel that greets you when you arrive in heaven. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've been sitting with my feet propped up for a while. They're both asleep, and I'm going to stand up and fall over while I get circulation going again.